Peter, this is a packed house. This is thrilling.
Hey,
Hi,
everybody. Yeah. Thanks for coming out today.
Yeah, appreciate you all being here and sharing part of the Nations Book Festival with us today. Thank you. So as Caitlin mentioned, we have 30 minutes. So I have way more questions than 30 minutes worth for you.
Let's get to it.
This being Washington, D.C., I'm going to try and make this like a little more game show and a little less hostage interrogation territory. But we're gonna just jump right in.
All right.
That's okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. So Caitlin mentioned one of your picture books, The Curious Garden. And I understand that the initial story seeds for The Wild Robot actually came to you when you were working on A Curious Garden, and then they just sort of stuck around. The series has stretched over 10 years now. So we have publication dates of 2016, 18, and 2023. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, sorry, that wasn't
Almost
a quiz.
10 years.
Almost 10 years
Yeah.
now. So what is it like to live with a project occupying your brain space for that long?
That's a great question. These books become really personal to me because I spend so much time on them. You know, the first Wild Robot book took me years to write and illustrate. I had the idea while I was, as you mentioned, writing and illustrating a picture book called The Curious Garden. That book was published in 2009. And I had the idea for the Wild Robot while I was working on it. So I must have originally had the initial idea for the Wild Robot in like 2008, a long time ago. And then I just sort of marinated in that idea for a while. I was thinking about this idea of a robot out in the wilderness and doing research into subjects like robotics and artificial intelligence, animal behavior, and working on other projects, you know. But I was starting to live with this idea back then in like 2008, 2009. And then eventually I got serious about it. After a few years went by, I got serious. I really thought I had something with this idea of a robot learning to survive in the wilderness. And at that point, I spent like another 2 years just working on this book altogether. And that's before the first book even came out in 2016. So yes, I have been like living with this whole story world for a really long time. And it's really fun. I love it, of course. It allows me to explore all of my favorite subjects, you know, subjects like animals. I love nature. I grew up watching David Attenborough specials on TV, and
We had an audience question already about that.
Okay, great.
You know, we'll come back on that.
In fact, so true story, when I was in high school, I was applying to art schools because I knew I wanted to be an illustrator, but I wasn't sure if I had the skills to make it. And so my backup plan was to study zoology. I applied to a bunch of universities that had good like biology and zoology programs, and I was thinking, you know, if I can't make books about animals, then maybe I can study animals. And it turns out I got into a pretty good art school. So I
think it worked out okay.
It worked out okay, yeah. But that was my plan. So I really love these subjects. I've been thinking about the life experiences of animals ever since I was a little kid. And through Roz the Robot, I get to really explore animals and the way they see the world, and allowing them to kind of have conversations with my robot character, and really trying to imagine what life is like for these various wild animals has been a real joy for me. And I love technology and thinking about what the future is going to look like and how technology is going to continue to affect our lives. And these stories just allow me to like blend all of these what seem like very different subjects together in one story that makes sense somehow. And so it's been kind of a dream project, as you can imagine.
So I want to come back to David Attenborough, and I also want to come back to the art school thing, but can we talk about technology for a second? So I understand you sort of lead with the question of what would an intelligent robot do in the wilderness? Yeah. And a little bit of a spoiler, I am guessing many of you have read one or more of these books at this point, but we find that she is able to make the wilderness her home. And I appreciated reading Roz because she is programmed with some background information that allows her to survive and capably learn. But I'm wondering if you think Roz hits a little different in an era of ChatGPT. Do you think kids will read her differently now than when you wrote her in light of technological advancements?
Yeah, and I think that's going to continue to happen. These stories are going to continue to change as our real world changes, right? When I wrote The Wild Robot, it felt very solidly science fiction. But I think in 10 years or 20 years or whatever it is, it's going to just maybe be fiction, right? Because we will have more and more advanced technology. It'll be in our lives in all sorts of ways that we can't even imagine right now. And I actually think a robot like Roz is possible. Scientists are already using robotics and artificial intelligence to communicate with animals in ways that we never thought possible. And that's what Roz is doing in the story. She learns how to communicate with the animals and therefore is able to have conversations with them and then develop relationships with them. And I don't know if in the future a robot will ever be able to have the kind of heart-to-heart conversation about the meaning of life with a bunch of wild animals the way Roz does. But I think they'll be able to have conversations that will seem unbelievable to us right now. So as the world changes, as our own real-life technology advances, I think these books will be received a little differently. I tried to write them in a way where they will stay relevant no matter what. I wrote them almost as if they're like fables. I kept it kind of general, kind of vague. You don't know what year this is. You don't know where the exact location is. And I did all that on purpose because I didn't want to say, it's on the Aleutian Islands and the year is 2050, because eventually the year 2050 is going to roll around and people are going to be like, well, he got that way wrong, like with Back to the Future. Everybody was waiting for, what was the year when that took place? But, it was like 2015 or something. And 2015 rolled around, everybody's like, where's my hoverboard, So I don't want 2050 to roll around and everybody like, where's my Roz? So I kept a lot of those details vague, and what that ended up doing was making it feel a little bit more like this kind of timeless fable. And my hope is that as technology advances, it'll stay relevant because it's not too specific to one little moment in time, That's what I was thinking anyway.
Your writing, sort of channeling that fable aspect, your writing is very true to animal behaviors and instincts. And I mean this really in the nicest way possible, but it's kind of blunt about some of the realities of nature.
Yeah.
Creatures die. We see food chains and harsh winters, like you were showing it all. So we did have a question in advance, actually, of were you a fan of David Attenborough as a kid? But I'm wondering why it was important to you to write so matter-of-factly for a young audience, and how do you keep yourself in a youthful mindset to strike that balance?
Yeah, it's a balance. I didn't want to sugarcoat things. I had a lot of faith in young readers that they would be willing, could handle the things that I wanted to talk about, including the harsh reality of life in the wilderness. And I didn't think I could really create the sense of tension. Life for Roz, the robot, we have to worry about her for this story to work. In order for us to care about her, her life has to be in danger, which means the wilderness has to be a tough place, like in reality. And if it's a tough place, then I have to show details of how hard it is, or else it won't feel like a tough place to live. And so I was like, well, I can't sugarcoat it. I'm going to have to talk about some of the ugly sides of life in the wilderness, And so, yeah, I talk about death. We talk about food chain. There's animals wanting to hunt each other. And then there's Roz, sort of stuck in the middle. And this was kind of one of the beautiful things of the whole concept for me was there's Roz, who doesn't really fit perfectly into any world. She makes this wilderness her home, but she's a machine. And she's not a person, right? So she doesn't fit in perfectly in the human world. She doesn't fit in perfectly in the world of the wild animals. She's kind of trying her best to fit into all these worlds, and she's kind of stuck. And so there she is trying to be a good steward of the island where they live. She's trying to look after her friends and her family. And also she realizes that they have instincts of their own. And she can't ask a fox not to hunt, Otherwise, that fox isn't going to survive. And so she's in this very awkward position of trying to walk this line. The only time she really takes control of the situation is when they're in her home, which she calls the nest. When she's got animals in the nest, she's like, okay, everybody, everybody's safe here. Everybody's welcome here and everybody's safe. Once you go outside, then you can live by the rules of the wilderness. But when you're in here, we got to get along. And so that was one of the ways that I had her sort of awkwardly handling that difficult situation.
I really appreciated the dawn truce that you had also, if you want to just briefly explain.
Sure.
Sort of.
Yeah, well, so the dawn truce is a moment every morning on the island where all these animals and Roz live, where they get together and there's an agreement that they won't hunt each other just for this hour or so around dawn. And the idea for that was, first of all, there are moments in the day when hunters are less active. Usually it's around dawn and dusk when the light is changing and it's hard to see, and so I think a lot of hunters take that time off because they figure this is not going to be a very effective time to hunt in the first place. And so I was like, all right, so there's these times of the day where hunters actually are relatively inactive, so maybe that would be a time where the animals could have this understanding that they could get together and talk about what's going on in the island. Usually it's just about stuff like, you know, so-and-so's hungry, but keep an eye out for this bear because he's on the prowl. But then Roz, of course, shows up, and suddenly they're like, did you see that monster that arrived? That's something we need to talk about. And then, of course, she becomes part of the community, and then she participates in the Dawn Truce also. But it was just like a little moment, a little technique for me to allow us to see these animals, that they actually have a community. And that's what Roz wants to be part of. So that was big part of the theme of the story, was that Roz becomes part of this community, even though it's not a community like our own community. I mean, we're not hunting each other the way some of those animals are on the island, but I still wanted to...
That's the next session.
Yeah. I just wanted to give a sense of community, that Roz was not a member of it in the beginning, and then over the course of the story, she works towards becoming a member of it.
And you bring up several different tensions over the course of each of these books. And in the third book, we have a pretty notable shift in tone with the stress that the community is facing with climate change and a waterborne pathogen, I guess we could say.
Yeah, pollution.
Pollution.
Yeah, a mysterious form of pollution.
That's impacting everyone. But there really are no villains in this series. There's never really like a bad guy. So even the hunter, we understand why he's hunting. And the people who you sort of frame as bad guys at a certain point, everybody gets redeemed. So can you talk a little bit about sustaining tension without an enemy to focus on?
So early on in the story, and one of the very first drafts of this Wild Robot, Roz, I was still figuring out Roz the robot, this character. Who was she? What were her abilities? And I was just throwing spaghetti against the wall, you know, just trying to see what felt right. In one of the very early drafts of the story, Roz was a military robot, and she crashes in an airplane crash onto this island. Pretty quickly, I realized that that wasn't going to work, because if she's a military robot and she gets attacked by a bear, she can defend herself, and that bear is probably not going to survive. That is not the story I wanted to tell, right? In fact, that was the opposite of the story I wanted to tell. And so in that moment, I realized Roz is a peaceful robot. She is physically incapable of harming others, right? She can kind of defend herself awkwardly, but she cannot attack anybody. She's a peaceful robot, and that theme really struck a chord for me. And I like the idea that this robot has no choice but to find peaceful solutions to the trickiest of problems. And she has to kind of develop her own almost creativity in order to solve those problems and to get out of those situations. So all of a sudden, I'm like, this is a book about a peaceful robot. I like that idea. And in fact, I like the idea that all the characters who we might think are bad are actually doing the best they can, and maybe not doing very well at times, but they're struggling in their own way. That felt really interesting to me. Lots of stories that bad guys, villains are really fun to root against. But I thought this would be a really interesting creative challenge to write these stories where there's all this tension, but there's no clear bad guy. And even if somebody seems a little bad at first, we get to know them down the road, and we realize, actually, they're not so bad after all. And yet there's still tension in the story. That was a very satisfying challenge for myself, and I thought it presented just a different kind of story. You know, we're all familiar with stories about robot uprisings and all that, you know, like villains who need to be defeated. And I thought, let's do something a little different here. And I felt pretty good about how I navigated all that stuff.
I think we would probably get a thumbs up on that from the audience as well.
Good.
So you illustrated these. You have illustrated many picture books, written and illustrated many picture books, but you did do the artwork for this series as well, which you described as simple and moody, which I really appreciated. And you mentioned earlier you have a background, you're trained in art and a background in animation. Some of our audience may have heard there is actually a major motion picture coming out next month about the Wild Robot. And I am wondering, I know, big thumbs up on that. We can applaud for that. That's a really big deal. Yay for the movie. But I am wondering how it feels to see a different artistic interpretation of Roz and the characters you created.
Yeah. So it feels kind of weird. It's a little weird, but it's cool. I love animation. when I went to art school, my dream was to work at a place like DreamWorks or Pixar or Disney, because I just loved animation so much. While I was at art school, I realized children's books was kind of a better fit for my particular interests and skills. So I shifted gears, but I've always loved animation. I watch a lot of animation. So of course it's thrilling to see my characters and my story come to life in an animated film. But it's not the exact, I mean, I illustrated using ink on paper and Photoshop to collage together these shapes and add color. It's kind of got this very kind of simple, moody effect. I was perfectly capable of doing more complex illustrations, but I didn't want that for this book. As I said earlier, I wanted it to feel kind of like a fable, and so I thought the artwork needed to be kind of simple, not too specific, not too detailed, just enough to kind of capture your attention and kind of reflect what's happening in the story. Animation is a very different kind of art form, and they need more detail. So the animated movie is, got a lot more granular detail than what you find in the books. The character designs are close, but not the same as what I have in the books. And, so it's a little strange to feel like Roz is now turning into this other thing, but my books aren't going anywhere. So if I'm happy that we get to have both. That's kind of feels cool to me, that the Wild Robot books will keep going, and the movie will happen, and you can have both or one or the other or whatever. And it's pretty exciting though. And there's a lot of excidement for the movie. Oh my God.
Have you seen it yet? Do you get to see it?
I haven't
Any
seen,
big plans for the
I've seen like a 90% finished version of it. The DreamWorks right now is trying to schedule a screening for me at a movie theater near where I live, which would be pretty cool. It's just gonna be me, little old me, in a whole movie theater by
I'll bring
myself.
some popcorn.
Yeah.
I'm there.
I mean, that's what they want. They're like, you can't bring anybody else. Maybe my wife, I don't know, but that's about it. And so that's
Oh, wait, no, you really do mean it is just going to be you. They're doing like a special thing,
Yeah.
so you.
Oh, yeah, that's
not
true.
like hey, splashy in our community. Like,
No. Well,
like you get a private showing.
That kind of stuff might happen also, but before the premiere, they want me to see the finished movie, and so they're like, we can put it in a movie theater so you get the full effect. And I was like, let's do that.
That sounds pretty fantastic.
Yeah. So that's happening. So I haven't seen the finished movie yet because we're still figuring out like what the theater and what time, and takes a little figuring out to schedule a screening of a movie for a single person.
Well, I have to say, my brain right now is thinking like the pressure of which seat you would choose in an entirely empty theater.
Very center, that's my go-to. for
Okay,
sure.
great.
Yeah.
Surround sound view. I love it.
Yeah.
We did see that there is a field guide coming out. Is that in connection? Is
You
this
had
like
to
a
bring
movie?
that up, didn't you?
Uh-oh. I actually don't. That's all I know is that it exists.
The field guide was a really cool idea that I think we're going to do a little bit later.
Oh, okay.
We were trying to get it out in time for the movie, but it just wasn't going to happen. So we've put that on the back burner.
I actually found a pub date of September 2024, but then I also found a publication date of 2027. So this actually makes sense
Yes, there you go.
Okay.
The idea was that we meet so many interesting animals throughout the course of the Wild Robot books that it might be kind of fun to have like a field guide, almost like a nature guide that you would get for like birding or something, where it talks about all the different animals you meet and about their traits, and where you might find them and what they eat and all that kind of stuff.
Sure, but the ancient shark, you can't bring up book 3 for just the movie for book 1, right? You have all these animals, you head to different spaces.
Right, so it makes sense to maybe make the field guide a little bit later down the road. Hopefully by then people will have read. There won't be spoilers. If that's what you're getting at, that there would be a spoiler?
No, I just didn't know anything about it. I saw that it existed. I did my librarian research. I was looking up what you had,
Yeah.
forthcoming publication dates. But that also vaguely suggests to me that we might have more movies coming down the line too. So
I think there will be, yeah.
that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I think you heard it here first.
I didn't make the movies, right? People come up to me and they congratulate me on these movies, and I'm like, well, I didn't make the movie. Don't congratulate me. I was involved. Of course, it's based on my book, so I was essential. but I had a lot of conversations with Chris Sanders, the director, over the years. It takes years to make these movies, and so we would get on Zoom. He's out in Hollywood, and I'm in the East Coast, and so we would talk over Zoom every month or two about stuff they were working on, and they would bounce ideas off of me, and they would pick my brain about why I did certain things. So I was involved, but I wasn't like in the studio making animation or anything like that. So it's a little weird because I'm like, I don't quite know what my relationship is with a movie exactly.
I feel like we need a couch for that conversation.
Yeah,
not,
trust me.
Not shared.
Yeah, my wife has spent many hours listening to me
Good
talk
partner,
about this.
good partner. So what is your artistic creative process like these days? It's not the film animation, but the tools that you're using for the artwork that you're making now, has that evolved? Has that changed over time?
Yeah. I was getting more digital. In the early days of my career, I made art the old-fashioned way. I painted on illustration board. And then I started experimenting with a little bit more digital stuff. It's kind of half traditional, half digital. And that's sort of where I've ended up. The artwork in the Wild Robot books is made up of simple shapes that I paint with black ink on watercolor paper. I have all these pages just filled with what look like random shapes, but they're not random because I'm painting them for a reason, because I know where they're going to go. Like on the cover here, we see Roz. I'm sure you in the back won't know what I'm pointing at here, but we see Roz standing on an iceberg, and there's this big kind of iceberg shape, and that was like that started off as a big black shape that I painted with ink on paper, and then I scanned that shape into my computer. I turned it from black to white. I added some details. I plopped it in the middle of the page. I added a whole bunch of other stuff. But everything starts off with me actually painting by hand on paper, and then I start using my computer. And to me, that's a fun way because I still get a little bit messy, which is sort of fun, but I have a lot of control over what the finished art looks like, and I end up being able to make exactly what I want.
And is that the same process for when you create picture books, or is that
Some of my picture books.
Wild Robot specific?
Well, I started doing this with a book called Mr. Tiger Goes Wild, which I read earlier this morning. That was the first time I used that technique, and then I used it again for a book called My Teacher is a Monster, and then I started making the Wild Robot books using that same process. But I don't always do that. I have other books. I illustrate a series of books written by Aaron Reynolds called The Creepy Tales, Creepy Carrots, Creepy Crayon, Creepy Pair of Underwear. And so for those books, I'm doing something simpler, but it's drawing with pencil on paper instead of ink on paper. But my computer is involved these days basically in all the finished art that I make.
So is there anything that you're working on that you might want to tell us about?
Well, there's a Wild Robot picture book that's going to come out, which I'm very excited about, because these Wild Robot books have full color art on the covers, but all the interior illustrations are black and white. And I just was like, I love these characters in this world. It would be really fun to bring them to life more visually with more color. And so I have a book coming out next year called The Wild Robot on the Island, which is kind of a retelling of the first book, but in a much more visual way. It's not a graphic novel, it's a picture book, but you get to see these really richly illustrated, full-color scenes, some of which will be sort of familiar from the book, and some will be moments that we didn't actually see in the book, but might have happened, when between chapters or something like that. So I tried to find a way of like telling the story that people are sort of familiar with, but also adding some new stuff to it, and it'll all be very obviously visual. It's like full bleed, full color. The color is intense. My publisher was like, they used the word bonkers to describe the color. They used the word technicolor to describe it, because I just was like, I just wanted to really go for it and just really show a whole other side to this world that some people might be really familiar with, but they haven't seen it in full color, and so it was fun to do that.
And welcome a whole new audience.
Yeah, and it's for, it's a picture book, so maybe it'll get younger readers into the sort of Roz world, and then there'll be a whole series of novels waiting for them.
Hook 'em young. I love it.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
So I just have one last question for you, and that is, do you ever feel guilty when you click a CAPTCHA and it says, I am not a robot?
Someday robots will be surfing the internet, and what are they going to say when they get to one of those things? Because they're going to be a person, in a way, a mechanical person, right? Imagine you're a robot with artificial intelligence, and you have to get on online to do something, and then it says, I'm not a robot.
That is meta. That is just taking us.
You'll be like, well, actually, technically, I am a robot, but I think this is okay for me to be doing this, so I'm going to say I'm not a robot, but am I breaking the law? I feel bad for the
big questions,
robots,
Peter.
right?
These big questions.
That's what that's for you.
So we have just a couple of minutes left, and we're going to be able to take maybe one or two questions from the audience. I'm going to, I think people have two mics. We have two mics, one on each side, if we can have friends line up.
We got one ready. Yeah.
Front and center here, friend. Can you come to the mic and share your question?
So I was wondering why you made Swooper the owl kind of, I guess, the mayor of the island.
Well, so Swooper is this old kind of wise owl. He's not quite as wise as he thinks he is. He takes it upon himself to sort of run the show, but not everybody's on board with it. He's a fun character. we think of owls as being kind of wise, and I like the idea that he wants to be wise, but, he's not perfect, and he's still got stuff to learn. So I don't know if I'd call him the mayor, but he would call himself the mayor. So, yeah, I don't know. He just seemed like a fun character, and he kind of filled a nice little niche in the story.
My mom also had a question.
Okay.
She wanted to know if the ancient shark was based on the Greenland shark, because they're some of the oldest living sharks.
So in the third book, The Wild Robot Protects, we meet an ancient shark whose actual name, when we get to know her, is Guri. Another name for Greenland sharks is the Guri shark, which is why I named the ancient shark Guri. So yes, that shark is based on the Greenland shark, which is known to live up to about 500 years, which was such a fun character to imagine what an animal would see over the course of their lifetime. So I was really, really excited about my ancient shark character. Should we go over here?
Thank you for the questions.
Are you making any other books besides for your picture book?
Well, yeah. I've got a lot of books in store. I mentioned my Creepy Tales, which I've got more Creepy Tales books that I'm doing with Aaron Reynolds. I've got more novels that I want to write for young readers. There's a lot of books coming down the pipeline. So, yeah, you definitely haven't seen the last of my work. Thank you.
Over on this side?
Is the movie all 3 books or just the first book?
The movie is based on the first book. And I think it's certainly not guaranteed, so don't quote me. But it looks pretty likely that they will probably make some more movies based on the other books. So fingers crossed. Yeah.
Okay.
Over here?
Hi, over on this side.
Okay. So when your books involve climate change, it usually, it's not climate change itself, but it usually symbolizes something. I don't get what the recos symbolize.
What do the recos symbolize? Wow. Okay. Well, in the first book, Roz is eventually confronted by her kind of mysterious past when these robots come to the island, and they're called the Ricos. And to me, they symbolize the world Roz was supposed to live in. She wasn't supposed to be on that island. She was supposed to be in civilization with people and with other robots, but she found herself stranded on this island. And then these Ricos show up, and they, to me, symbolize the life she was supposed to live and the civilized world in a way. I guess that's what you'd say they symbolize. It's a tough question. Nobody has ever asked me that before, so I'm not completely prepared, but I love that question.
Way to go, reader.
Yeah. Do we have time for another one, maybe? Okay. One more.
One more question. Take us home.
If that hurricane never came, what would happen to Roz?
That actually ties in, great question. That ties into the last question. If Roz hadn't ever been swallowed up in a hurricane and her crate hadn't been washed off a boat and then washed onto the shore of this island, she would have gone with all these other robots to some port, and they would have gotten unloaded, and they would have been sent to some distribution center, and then to a store, and then they would have ended up probably at a family or a business doing manual labor. That's the life Roz was supposed to live. But because of this hurricane, she ends up being stranded on an island, and in her effort to just stay functional, she ends up learning how to communicate and how to survive, and develops this whole unexpected life for herself in the wilderness,
That's
all
like
because
the
of that hurricane.
prequel alternative universe story we definitely don't want you to have to write, I think. So,
Yeah, exactly.
these were terrific questions, really
for those
deep
questions.
reading
Yeah.
of the series. I really love that. Well, thank you so much for taking time and sharing this experience with us. Really appreciate you all coming today and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, thanks everybody.